Do you remember the toaster? The joke used to be that if you were gay and you converted someone who had been straight up until that point, you got a toaster from headquarters. Younger people think that that started with Ellen coming out on TV back in the 90s. It's kind of weird to be in my early 40s where I can say to someone, "No, Sonny, you've got it all wrong. Back before you were born, there were toasters, long before Ellen came out on TV." But like so many creative, strong, persistent countercultural ideas, the toaster was born in response to deep, ugly fear. I'm told maybe from the Anita Bryant cultural crusades of the mid-70s, the bottom line of which were, the homosexuals are out there and they're after your kids. So after hearing that piece of demonization and fear-mongering, we flipped that script. "Yes," went the campy response. "It's like when you sell Mary Kay. Only instead of a houndstooth tote, top salespeople receive a toaster." That camp saved us, taking the mickey at homophobia, fear, nudging at the idea that capitalism might even tie in with attraction. Interesting symbol, the toaster. So this is an example of the verb of queer, to queer. This verb had been used as a pejorative, making something broken. Queering a deal meant making it sour, making it go south, driving people away. But what it means now, queering, is to look through a queer lens, finding the meaning a thing did not know that it had, claiming that meaning, and finding a new connection, a yes and. Bringing a thing into the circle, adorning it with love and self-acceptance, like the Fab Five from Queer Eye. The word queer has scary connotations for some of us. For a long time it meant other, not one of us. It was a word that was weaponized. And that's one of the scariest things we can experience. A word used as a weapon to strike out at us and push us out of the circle of inclusion. Older generations have opened up a space for people like me, with their hearts in their throats, bloody with fighting for their lives and their friends' lives, not knowing what the outcome would look like, not knowing what inclusion could look like. In contrast, I, Kai Flannery, have usually been able to pass. I prefer she, her, and they, them pronouns. But I've always kind of been able to read what others are most comfortable with and to look that way. No matter who I was in love with, in many settings, I could be undercover. It was only when I moved to Boston that I began to explore gender expression. What made me feel strong? What made me feel brave? What colors could I fly? How would I fly under the radar? And that's where I began to identify as genderqueer. And I like to bring it back, maybe not to the 50s use of queer, but like to the 1500s. Odd, peculiar, eccentric, that kind of queer. I can get with that. And I went looking for other people's words about what queer means to them. And I found words from Vontae Abrams, a New Yorker. Vontae says, "My queerness encompasses my voice as a Black, male-assigned, non-binary individual. I embrace non-binary because I am naturally androgynous. Puberty gave me a physical and emotional blend of masculine and feminine traits. I've learned over time that navigating societal rules of binary presentation is always going to be a challenge for me. Queer helps me face that challenge." And I'm going to include just a little link to some of these resources in the chat so that you can read Vante's words in their entirety if you wish. But I love how Vante talks about queerness as courage and a way of claiming ourselves. And yet queering is not an answer that stays for always. It doesn't give us the final story. It gives us another part of the story, a richer part of the story. When we look with queer eyes at religious traditions, we can find the refusal of gender in a lot of places, such as Avalokiteshvara Buddha, the most compassionate Buddha, who is pictured sometimes as masculine, feminine, androgynous. I think Avalokiteshvara Buddha might use the pronouns they. Or delving into Genesis to find the Hebrew pronouns for God and for the first human made in God's image, and realizing that we've assumed an awful lot in our translations and in our patriarchy. And hearing words from whenever we unearth new parts of our story as an LGBTQIA+ community, such as these from Reverend Irene Monroe, who was at the Stonewall riots. Reverend Irene writes, "The first night of Stonewall Inn, the riots played out no differently from previous riots with Black Americans and white policemen. African Americans and Latinos were the largest percentage of the protesters because we heavily frequented the bar. For Black and Latino homeless youth and young adults who slept in nearby Christopher Park, the Stonewall Inn was their stable domicile." She explains that the second night is where the broader gay community got involved. White folks, folks with economic privilege, stepping in and going to battle with and for one another. But queering the narrative means that we want to know as much of the story as we can get our hands on, our neighbor's view of the story. And frequently we center our neighbor's view. After all, only 1 in 7.8 billion stories really gets to be about me. And that number is bigger when we count all living things and not just humans. Part of having queer eyes is that we don't miss the we that is bigger than I, but also that the I is allowed and encouraged to sing out. Queering means looking to the collective, to the many voices, to the fringes, to the tentative, to the unself-conscious, to that which does not know how to market itself and doesn't care to. What I love about queer theology is that it isn't about purity. It isn't about the idea of being washed clean. Beauty and the divine is found in the dirt, in the earth, in our body's functions and our body's desire, in the difficult stories. This is not a love that knows all the answers or hides in bluster, but a love which wants to know more, a love which offers, above all, attention. If you've loved, really loved, which I hope you have and get to every day, you know that love contains pain and grit and dirt. And sometimes lust dominates, and that's also to be trusted in its way. Queering love is not a binary. Is it lust or love? It's both. It's all. But we work to make sure that our self-expressions, our expressions of desires, don't do harm. We see the other as a being, not as a thing. We don't throw out one part of ourselves also, just because it's basic or primal. Queer theorist Judith Butler wrote that condemnation becomes the way in which we establish the other as unrecognizable. Queering and queerness reacquaints us with that which we had thought to condemn. And in that way, I find it intrinsically universalist. When I think of queering justice work and the way the queer community has impacted justice work, I think first of Black and Pink, a prisoner support organization that does letter writing. They're out of Boston, founded by a UU minister, Jason Leiden. And what I love about that is that the arms of love, the hands of love, the letters of love extend into the presence to people who need them the very most. The queer theology, part of what queer theology gets is that nobody is undesirable because they're a rule breaker or because they've been beaten down by a flawed system. And queer theology gets that strength and power are not the same. In queering care, we care for everyone in solidarity. There's a spectrum of abilities, of colors, of strengths, of weaknesses, of visions, of desires. And we learn where we are on the spectrum through connection, through meeting, through being a mirror and finding a mirror. And I think this mirroring is actually quite threatening to the fabric of business as usual. It is a stopping, a holding on, a waiting to witness, a reserving judgment. It pushes us to ask, who is my neighbor? The queer lens makes us look twice, more than twice, embracing that within ourselves and within the world which is surprising or outcast. Finding ways to celebrate that. And the voice is saying you are all wrong. You're too loud. Your voice is the wrong pitch. You don't get to play. What are you? Those voices are still present. But we have taken the time to appreciate our own mystery and yours. What can you say against the power of another person's mystery? We are here, we are queer. You are queered, no longer feared. I'm called into some words by Polly Murray, who was a very important activist in the civil rights movement, and also became a minister, in fact. And Polly wrote, "I have been cast aside, but I sparkle in the darkness. I have been slain, but I live on in the river of history. I seek no conquest, no wealth, no power, no revenge. I seek only discovery of the illimitable heights and depths of my own being." So it's breaking out. It's not just beating someone at their own game, it's breaking the mold, breaking the system that says you have to beat someone at their own game. With queerness, I think we've moved to a kind of broken toaster model. And I'll return us to the words of our reading. I am an appliance that rattles and spits out sparks and blows every fuse. I used to serve some function, but now I prefer not to. Place me on your kitchen counter and watch life become less and less convenient. I will trip you up. Welcome this unraveling. The less efficient you become, the better. Break all rote habits and build your life out of satisfying pauses between action. Now eliminate all action. Now you can finally feel the truth. Morning is slow, but it's the straightest path forward. The question is not, how do I get out of this? Or how do I stop landing here? The question is, how do I break this appliance permanently? How do I become an inconvenience to myself and others? How do I swear off efficiency forever? How do I keep losing the thread over and over? How do I remain out of the groove, off the map, in the zone, flexible and reflective, shimmering and cool? Examining the high stakes of tiny moments, encouraging communion, forgiveness, expansion, invention. May it be so. Amen.